This morning's reading comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven. Don't even begin to think that I have come to do away with the law and the prophets. I haven't come to do away with them, but to fulfill them. I say to you very seriously that as long as heaven and earth exist, neither the smallest letter nor even the smallest stroke of pen will be erased from the law until everything there becomes a reality. Therefore, whoever ignores one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the lowest in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps these commands and teaches people to keep them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I say to you that unless your righteousness is greater than the righteousness of the legal experts and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to focus on that interesting image of you are the salt of the earth. And I want to start with our great children's choir. I have a question for the children. Are you ready, children? Ready? Have you ever had a French fry that did not have salt on it? What did you think of it? Yuck. Is that a good word? Did you ever have a baked potato with no salt on it? What did you think of it? It didn't taste very good at all. Well, I'm glad you answered it that way. I was hoping you would, because you might as well have paper-flavored cardboard than have a French fry or a baked potato with no salt. Obviously, salt, one of the great characteristics of salt is it really makes things taste good. I know someone who even puts salt on pizza. I would not recommend it, but he loves it. That's how much he loves salt. And also, if you were in the Wild West, you know the other great characteristic of salt was as a preservative, keeping things fresh comparatively throughout the winter. So traditionally, we will say that Jesus is saying that Christians really add flavor to the world by the way they love and the way they forgive each other in the world and so forth, and that they really bring life and preserve life and the sanctity of life within this world. Traditional concepts of what Jesus might have meant by saying you are the salt of the earth. However, I ran across a third characteristic of salt that I had never known before. I think you'll find interesting, and I think you'll note that this is really what Jesus is referring to when he says, you're salty. Here is what I heard from the Upper Room. I read in the Upper Room devotional a while back. It was the morning of the dedication service for a new church building in a town in Thailand. As part of the dedication ceremony, an ice sculptor had carved a beautiful cross. Just as he finished the carving, one side of the cross broke off. The sculptor quickly put salt around the cracked area and then linked the broken part back to the original position. After he held it firmly for a few minutes, the two parts were solidly reconnected. That event led me to think about our mission from Jesus, to be the salt of the earth. Jesus wants us to be the connecting and reconciling power among people who are broken, who have forgotten or have never known the love of God. It's the mission that Paul wrote of in 2 Corinthians. God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, and he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. Wow, what a new powerful image, at least for me, of what salt is. Salt, I think this is what Jesus is referring to. Salt is powerful because it brings different parts together. Salt brings that which is broken and forms it into a unified whole. It bonds pieces together. Get that in your mind. Because Jesus has just said that the peacemakers are the beatitude folks, the blessed folks. These are the ones who have emptied themselves of their vanity. Just like what we ought to be doing whenever we come in here to worship. We empty ourselves before God. We say, it's not us on the throne, it's you on the throne, Lord. We empty ourselves. And then we're open to being filled by the gospel. And we know the gospel by what Jesus said. 2 points. That you have a hunger and thirst for justice, and that you are moved always by compassion. So you fill yourself up with that, and then because of your meekness, which is the humility, the openness, the emptiness that you have, because you're filled with God's Spirit, then you have the gall, the courage, the audacity to step into the breach and hold sometimes warring factions together to bring about reconciliation. That is the one determining characteristic of the Christian. You're salty when you are a peacemaker. And wow, Jesus is really right when he says that that's what gives flavor to the world. That's what catches the world's attention whenever we dare, in a world that's factious, in a world that fragments, in a world that's hostile. It's what really catches people's attention when we have the audacity to bring back the broken pieces and celebrate our common humanity. Didn't you just see this past week? The crazy desecration of that Jewish cemetery in New City. And isn't it amazing how it made national news that Republicans and Democrats, and regardless of who else, converged upon that cemetery, righted the headstones, and celebrated unity of humanity in the midst of something that would fragment. Peacemakers, blessed are you peacemakers, because you're salty. That made national headlines. But I want to suggest to you that in our own small ways, we can make personal headlines that are just as powerful whenever we look into our own lives and see how we can be the salt of the earth. I invite you to hear these real-life stories of salty Christians.
I'm one of 4 children in a blended family. There's my biological brother, and I have a half-sister and half-brother from our father's first marriage. My brother and I had been fairly close to our half-siblings until our father died. In his will, Dad designated me to carry out his wishes, and I did just that. When it came time to liquidate his bank account, I wrote 4 equal checks. My half-brother accused me of keeping some of the money to myself and shorting him and the other kids. I assured him that I wouldn't do that. But didn't make a difference. He wanted proof. He wanted to see the bank statements. Now, that just made me mad. Although I didn't have anything to hide, I had something to prove. I was not going to be bullied. We had a big argument, and I haven't talked to him in over 20 years. It's been a burden, I have to admit, especially around Christmas time. I'm still connected to all my other family members, but not to him. I've tried to pretend that it doesn't bother me, but it does, even though I haven't done anything wrong. Recently, I felt the need to reach out to him. Once he's gone, it'll be too late. I've sent Christmas cards from time to time, but I've never gotten a reply. Maybe it's time to just drop by and knock on his door. I'll take the bank statements with me.
Have you ever met anybody you instantly didn't like? You didn't even think about it. You just didn't like that person. Well, that happened to me back in college. It was a small college, and there was a guy who had the same major as me. It meant that we had a lot of the same classes together. Oh, great. He didn't like me any more than I liked him. We'd sling barbs at each other like it was some kind of competition. But something bothered me. I'd become a Christian the years before through a youth group, and I started studying the Bible, especially Jesus' teachings. And the teachings that kept coming back to my mind was, love your enemies, do good to them. Oh, great. I didn't want to do that. I enjoyed needling the guy, but I knew it was wrong. So I called him up one afternoon and asked if he'd like to get together for some coffee at the student union. I just wanted to talk and get to know him and become more acquainted. I'll always remember this long silence at the end of the line. Finally, he stammered, sure. So we set a date and met. I got to know him and his background. He got to know me. We never did become close friends, and we still needle each other in class occasionally. But after that one coffee, the needles were less sharp, and they had a kinder edge to them.
I guess we all have times when we say something without thinking. Sometimes what we say has a way of catching us and exposing really what's in our heart. I was in this study group that met once a month for about 9 months. One time during a break in class, I happened to tell a joke. It was a gay joke, and it perpetuated a homosexual stereotype. This was a long time ago. We didn't think twice about the insensitivity or the political incorrectness of it. We all laughed, except for one guy. At our next meeting, that person called me out. He said, I have to start by saying that I was offended by the joke you said. I'm gay, and I really didn't appreciate it. It hurt. Wow. I had no idea. And I was wrong on so many levels. That was a humbling learning experience for me that day. Now, that colleague and I, we became good friends. And my worldview widened quite a bit. I just regret it took me hurting someone with my words to discover it. I'm just glad the Spirit gave me the grace to admit that I had made a mistake.
I'm a staff person at a large suburban church. We host English as a second language with 100 students from around the world in our classrooms every week. A couple of months prior to our presidential election, during an ESL-sponsored luncheon, I was introduced to a gentleman from Syria. He asked me what my role was in the church, and I shared, and I asked him what he does for a living, and he shared. After visiting for a few moments, he brought up the impending presidential election and asked who I planned to vote for. I was surprised. This is a topic that I habitually steer around in the church. I said I voted for Clinton, assuming that this person from across the seas would have done so as well. To my absolute surprise, this immigrant, who had just become a U.S. citizen, said he voted for Trump. You could have knocked me over with a feather. He shared with me respectfully why he was doing so, and then he invited me to share my reasons for voting the way that I had planned, and I respectfully responded. It was a great conversation. He blew my stereotype of a Trump supporter right out of the water, and I hope that I did the same for him. We bridged the gap between us, put aside our differences, and we had a polite and constructive conversation. We each offered our view of the world through a different set of eyes. It struck me that maybe we would understand things better, not from Facebook or Fox News or CNN, but rather from a conversation with a fellow human who sees things differently from us. Maybe that's what being the salt of the earth is all about.
And it was a Monday morning, the Monday after that weekend where there was an executive order about the travel ban. You remember that, the protest around the airports and so forth. So our staff decided that it would be good if we sort of had a party, a welcome party for our ESL students, because some of them were affected by this. We sat around a big table, and or several different tables, and at my table there was a woman who was in tears. She was from Algeria, and she was struggling, confused about what was happening because her family was still in Algeria, and she was concerned about when or if even that she would be able to see them again. Now, this isn't the place for the pros and the cons of the ban, just to note that this was what that woman was feeling. And she said, I have to say I'm a bit confused. I don't understand why America is doing this. And one woman who was there on staff reached her hand to touch the hand of this woman from Algeria, and she said, we will be your family here for as long as it takes until you see your family again. Hence, ways of bonding two broken pieces together. Those opportunities are everywhere. Jesus said, after this image, that you are the light of the world. Remember, friends, in order to be the light of the world, you must first be the salt of the earth. May it be so.